Please welcome to the stage Susan Jackson, Head of Communications and Sustainability at BASF.
And good afternoon, POW 2024. I am not Susan Jackson. That is Susan Jackson, Head of Communication and Sustainability at BASF. I am Ramian Pierre. I'm part of the Executive Leadership Council team that is producing POW 2024. In a second, we're going to have a great conversation with Susan, but I just want to give all of you attendees a little information and some announcements before we get started. So first, in terms of announcements, there have been numerous requests for the playlist. We hear you, and the production team is going to drop a link to the playlist in the reception area. You can get it today, or if you come back over the next month while the recordings are live. That leads me to my second announcement. There have been questions about all the POW sessions, all 8 sessions. If you missed one on the other track, can you catch it? If you missed something on this track, can you get it later? Yes, you can. For the next month, you'll be able to come back to the session, come back to POW 24 platform in Hubelo, and you'll be able to play any of the 8 sessions, either ones you attended or ones that you didn't. So it is not lost forever. After that month, we'll transfer all of the content to the ELC's YouTube page. So look for it there. Last announcement before I get to Susan is during this chat, Susan and I will have a conversation for about half an hour or so. And then we want to open it up for Q&A so that you get what you came for. Please, please, please drop your questions into the Q&A tab. It's the 3rd tab on the right of your screens. So just go there, drop the questions there so that I can make sure I ask them of Susan when the time comes. And speaking of chat, please engage with each other. Susan is an expert at communication. And there are probably some other experts in this room. So let's mine the wisdom of the crowd. And to get that started, while I ask Susan the first question about her career experience, perhaps you can drop into the chat what brought you here today. What are you looking to get out of today's session? Because perhaps there's someone in the room who can help you. All right. So that said, Susan Jackson, thank you so much. I just like saying your full name. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to POW 2024.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I'm so happy that you're going to drop the playlist because I was definitely jamming to it before we started.
Yes, there was many a move being busted. All right, so with this first question, I really want to get into your experience around complex communications, and I also want to help the audience understand your career path. So can you share a bit about your career path to your current position as Head of Communications and Sustainability at BASF, and how along the way you experienced the challenge that is at the center of today's session, which is how to successfully communicate complex and enterprise level messages? Like, give us the roadmap that brought you here, Susan.
Oh man. Okay. We're starting off easy. I would say I would classify myself and have been classified as a non-traditional communicator. So what does that mean? I'm originally from Louisiana, which is not about the communications part, but my degree is in chemical engineering. So how do you start from a chemical engineer and end up head of communications and sustainability? It's a very long and winding road within BASF. I'll be celebrating 30 years in June with BASF. So thank you. A lot of different things, going back to school, getting my MBA, working in marketing, business development, and discovering that I was able to simplify complex topics for people. And then I discovered a passion for doing that, doing the creative part, working with customers, creating stories, visuals, trade fairs. And so that kind of evolved over my career. And then an opportunity came up to do marketing communications for one of our businesses. And it's funny because the senior vice president at the time asked, he said, but you're technical. Like, why would you want this? And I said, I'm giving you the best of both worlds. I can use both sides of my brain. I can understand the technical, but then I can help you figure out how to tell it in such a way that like a 5-year-old can understand it. So that's how I got to the communication side. And the sustainability part is actually new since last year. That kind of evolved from a gap in my organization that I saw And honestly, I started doing parts of the job before I got the job, working with our industry associations, doing advocacy, developing sustainability communications. And then fortunately, my boss at the time, when we did a little bit of a restructuring, added that to my role. And then I have 2 additional people working for me to help me do this job properly for BASF. To your question associated with that, you know, the importance of how delivering complex messages. I think when you and I were talking yesterday, the thing that came to mind immediately is what happens if you have a natural disaster and you're not able to supply your customer with the product that they need. Fortunately or unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with this because we've had a lot of hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, and we have a lot of large facilities down in the Texas, Louisiana area. So I've had to do that. And one of the important things associated with that is really understanding that it's not just one thing that you have to communicate. You have to figure out who are all the relevant stakeholders and what are all the challenges that you have to address. You have a hurricane, you're losing power, people have to evacuate, people's homes are flooding, for example. So it's not only the customer element, which is important, like how do you communicate to your customer that they're not going to get their deliveries on time, but you also have to think of the people. What about your employees? You know, they're in the midst of that kind of environment and they're also under stress. They have to think about their homes. They have to think about maybe evacuating, all these other things. So you have to figure out who your stakeholders are. Who do you have to communicate messages to? And then you also have to remember, like for my company, it's not just the employees that are on the ground in the midst of it, but it's the rest of the region, because everybody sees the news. Everybody can see that, you know, people are in danger. People are losing power. People are potentially losing their lives. So you also have to figure out how you're going to keep them updated. So that's a challenge.
Yeah. This is, I love several things about this. First, I want to go back to something you said earlier. I want to amplify it about when you were asked, why do you want to do communications? You're a technical person. I love that counter story that you delivered in, less than 12 seconds. You get I bring you the best of both worlds. I can use both halves of my brain. So I'm stealing that and sharing that with other folks. Counter storytelling is an essential skill for people of color. And I love the way you're describing what types of things you have to think about when you're trying to before you even try to communicate the complex messages, figuring out like what are the messages to whom, like doing all the work and the thinking and the brainstorming and the problem solving beforehand before you get to executing. I'm going to have you put a pause on this for a second because we're going to talk about 2 examples, crisis and merger and acquisition communications. But after our conversation yesterday, you really inspired me because there were a number of first order principles, maybe I'll call them, or strategies or tactics that work in both of those examples that I want to highlight. And I built a slide, and so I'm going to ask production if they can share that one slide. It's of 5 different things that came across in both of the stories that you're going to share later. So people can take a screenshot now, but trust me, we're going to talk about these things in a few minutes. But I wonder, Susan, if you could just take literally a moment to talk about each one. So let's do the first one. Building relationships with key stakeholders before you need them. Why is that so important?
That's important because it's buying you goodwill. Since we're talking about a crisis, but it's also true outside of a crisis. You don't want to have an emergency situation or a crisis situation where you need somebody to support you and you've never talked to them before. Okay. If you need like a big decision to be made, and the first time you're asking a decision maker is when you need the decision, then you've done it wrong. Related to that. Number 2.
Let's go to number 2. So balance being fast with being complete. What does that mean? Help me understand that one.
Well, if I take the example of a hurricane and a crisis, clearly, if I take the customer aspect, customers want to know immediately, okay, there's a hurricane. Am I going to get my product? If I'm not going to get my product, when am I going to get my product? So you don't want to give people the wrong information.
Okay,
You want to move quickly. So, if something happened today, you don't want to wait a week to communicate, because then people will wonder, okay, things are worse than what they are. They aren't communicating. There's something they're trying to hide. But if you communicate something in like 30 minutes after an event happens, then you may not have the full picture. You may be giving wrong information. And that can like kind of destroy trust a little bit if you went out quickly and then you have to come back later. It's okay to make a mistake, but if you don't have to move urgently, just take that extra time to make sure that you have at least initially some good information and a timeline on when you're going to get people more information.
Heard. All right. Let's go to number 3. Don't create messages in a vacuum. Help us understand that one.
Okay. That means that, yes, I'm communications, but I don't know everything, right? So in any type of crisis situation or just any type of communication situation, normally, you may not be the only person who has information that helps you build the story. If I talk about that hurricane in the plant, I can watch the weather, right? But I'm not down in the plant. So I need to talk to my manufacturing folks. What is actually happening? What did anything, is anything damaged? How are the employees? I also then have to talk to my supply chain and product management folks. Okay, what does our inventory situation look like? What does this mean for our customer orders? These are not things that I would know by myself. So I need to bring in the right people so that I'm creating the right message.
Awesome. Number 4, communication is often about managing uncertainty. What do we mean by that one?
That means when a crisis happens, you don't know everything, and you're not going to know everything. And that is 100% okay. The people that you have to communicate to, the people who are impacted by the crisis, they need some kind of certainty. So you have to be able to communicate to them and manage their uncertainty. And so that means not that you know everything, but that you are developing a timeline and enough information to say, okay, I'm telling you what I know today. I'm going to get an update in 48 hours and I will follow up with you. What questions do you have? It's this back and forth communications, but as long as you're being consistent in talking to the people, even if you don't have all the answers, that makes people feel better because they know that you're on top of it, even if you don't know everything.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, last one, number 5. While communicating complex messages, continuously debrief on how things are going. Did it resonate? Was it enough? Help us understand that one.
This is very basic. This is like if you're running a business, you need metrics. When you're communicating in a crisis, you need to check that your messages are working, that the information is sufficient. And that can be done in a variety of ways. I'm not talking about doing a survey. It can be qualitative conversations with your customers, for example, or the salespeople, asking them, okay, we gave you this information. Was that sufficient? Or were your customers asking you for something else? If you're talking to employees, you can poll some. Okay, does this meeting your needs? Do you feel good with what we're telling you, or is there something missing? Is it all in the right form? Are you sending emails when maybe people also want to see people face to face or talk to them on the phone? So it's just doing that circular discussion just to make sure that people are feeling comfortable and that you're creating the right communications for the channels that you have.
All right, this is awesome. So thank you for production for taking down the slide. For those folks in the session, you'll get the recording of this session for a month, and then here in Hoopolo, and then forever on the ELC's YouTube page, so you can come back to this slide and all the content later. So Susan, let's pivot to 2 examples. Let's do a crisis example first before we do a merger and acquisitions example. And
okay.
You've already started feeding us a bit of the crisis example. So here's the question. Based on your experience, what advice would you give corporate professionals on how they might lead communications during a crisis? Give us a masterclass, a TED Talk.
Well, we were talking about it. I gave the hurricane example first. Another example could be, well, it's an actual example. Working in manufacturing, we have a lot of plants having an environmental concern. that we develop a plan with the right government agencies, like the EPA, for example, and we're implementing that plan. So we're following the right process. And then what happens if you have a lovely local politician who you talked to before and they understand what you're doing, but then in the media, they make it seem like that you're not moving fast enough, right? So how do you deal with that? And this goes back to some of the elements on that slide that Ramian showed. Um, we would have, well, I have clear messaging that says this is what we're doing, that we are communicating with the right bodies, that the right government agencies have signed off on the plan, that they are aware of the plan, they're aware of the timeline, and we give them updates. When I talked about, building that goodwill in the community,
Yeah.
like I said, that doesn't start when you have a crisis. That starts far in advance. So we, at some of our plants, we have what they call community advisory panels. So it's members of the community, elected officials, local community leaders, and me or someone on my team, right? So we're there, and we've been developing that relationship over time so that people understand that a chemical plant is not the big bad. We're not the boogeyman. We invite them for tours. We're there. We live in their community. We have employees who live in their communities. Their kids go to the same school. We host events where people get to come to the site and see what we do, and we volunteer. So we're developing that relationship with the community. We're talking to the legislators. We do a lot of advocacy. I mean, I was just with Ramian a couple of weeks ago in DC to see him, but also to meet with our government officials to talk about things that are, yes, you were the most important. But on the side, I talked to some government officials to say, okay, here's what we're doing on certain issues, and this is where we need your support. So that's building that goodwill.
I want to go back to this goodwill piece. I want to just go back to something you said around you have plants, you have manufacturing plants. So I'm speaking particularly, I think this is advice that's particularly helpful for those folks working in those types of industries. It sounds like what you really did in all the advanced work was for people in the community. You demystified what goes on behind those walls, right? If I remember from our conversation, you said not only are your employees in the community doing volunteering at schools, talking about the work so that people understand what's going on, having people in for tours. You mentioned that. You also said that you cooperated with, BASF cooperates with local hospitals, police departments to do like a once a year emergency procedures wellness.
We do.
Knock on doors.
We do have drills. So we do have drills and have relationships with the police, the fire department, the hospitals. And then, yes, once a year, we do kind of a door knocking event where we go meet our neighbors and we hand them safety information, right? What to do in an emergency, how to act if like the siren goes off in the city, just basic household things, household emergency information. And also that helps just reinforce the relationship that we are a partner, we are there, we're a good place to work. We pay taxes that support the city services. So we want them to know that we're there for them and that they can count on us so that when there is a crisis, I mean, knock on wood, nobody wants a crisis, but when it happens, that they're giving us the benefit of the doubt, that they know, okay, it's not on purpose. These people have good processes in place. We know these people, and we know that whatever happens, they're going to make it right. They're going to have a plan that's going to make things better.
That part about we know these people, we trust these people, we know they have a plan. Your comms work starts even before something bad could possibly happen by giving folks a story to hang on to, information to hang on to before they get the hysterical, histrionic, possibly not entirely truthful. BASF is doing this and this, and watch out. And like before we get into social media, like you've already put down a good foundation of comms. A good
foundation. And then even to touch on that, when you talk about that, people being, a little hysterical, the key thing for anybody in communications, and just because my title says communications, it's not just for me, it's for anybody, because we all have to communicate when we're trying to be leaders in an organization or in our lives, is to be calm. Everybody else can freak out and start, spouting conspiracies and all these kind of things. You can't do that. I can't do that. we have to take a deep breath and be calm and go, we have the facts, we have the right information. And you just calmly say it. You speak it, you put it on social media, you share it with your employees, and you're just calm and confident because you have prepared and you know what you need to say.
So let's be real. You're calm and confident in public. Behind the scenes, when you're at home, you can be like, that son of a dog is saying all these things about us.
This is tea right now, but sometimes maybe it's not. Sometimes maybe it's not. It's okay to freak out. Poor Ramian. He's coming. He's getting over a cold, but he's a trooper today.
Oh, you guys are awesome. And I want to amplify what you said by pulling in a phrase that in the last session we were talking about leading organizational level change. Gina Ash, the speaker in that session, used a phrase at the end, unemotional engagement, that you have to learn how to engage, but in an unemotional way. It's not about you. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing, that particularly in a crisis, when people are going to likely be emotional, likely be pointing fingers, as somebody who is either has comms in their title or comms in their function and brand, you need to find a way to not take it personally and to outwardly be calm. And then if you have to go inside to drink your tea or your medicine, do it, be uncalm there. Am I hearing that right?
That is correct. And the point I'm making is that it doesn't matter if your communications are not. If you're involved in a crisis, if you're the person involved in the crisis, anybody who's listening to this, you have to take a deep breath. And if that means you have to step away and then come back, then do that. I'm not saying to not have emotion.
Yeah.
Right? You can be passionate. I can passionately tell you that we're doing the right things and I can list them off. I can do that with passion, but it doesn't need to devolve into a yelling match or anything like that.
I am going to amplify that too, because my therapist would be proud of me. That piece about you're not saying don't have emotion. One of the many things my therapist said that is smart. Well, two things. One is she said no one ever died from a feeling. I'm not so sure about that. I feel like any moment I could explode. But the really helpful piece is she said you're going to have feelings. They're going to be in the car with you. Just don't give them the wheel. You have to drive the car. The feelings can be screaming in your ear behind you, but don't give them the wheel. It sounds like you're saying the same thing. Have your feelings, but don't feed them too much.
Exactly. This is the same thing as when somebody tells you if somebody pisses you off, do not respond to the email immediately. Step away. Come back after a couple of hours.
Heard.
And then do it.
In fact, I used to have, I don't know if Outlook still has this feature. Years ago, I used to have a feature where every outgoing message sat in a buffer for 2 minutes. So if I wrote it, and that's the way I type, if I wrote it and then push send, I had 120 seconds to realize that's a mistake. Let me stop. All right, let's pivot to another example. And we discussed this yesterday. This is a great example around how do you communicate or what things you think about when communicating a merger and acquisition. So not a crisis, but a big enterprise level activity. Can you give folks some advice about how they may want to conceive of, execute comms during a situation like that?
Yes, I can talk about this because a few years ago, my company did acquire a large global business from another company. And I was the lead for the North American part of it. So just like with the other crisis, the same thing with a merger and an acquisition, you have to identify your stakeholders. Who are the people that you need to communicate to? You have employees from both companies. The company that's going to be acquired, people within the company who are going to receive the acquisition, and then also customers, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you have to be clear on what information you can and cannot communicate on the timing. Because with an M&A, merger and acquisition, there are legal requirements, right? It could take a long time. It could take over a year. It could take, before the deal is final. And there's various steps and legal requirements. And since this was a global acquisition, there were different requirements in different countries. And so we had to all be aligned and know what we could and couldn't say. So I spent a lot of time talking with my lawyers. And I love my lawyers. But if I take the employees, for example, the employees from the acquired company, they're in a period of uncertainty. So you want to figure out how do you make it less uncertain for them, but you can't tell them a lot of things because some things are still being negotiated. So you have to find a balance to say, I want them to understand that we're serious about the acquisition, that we're excited to have them come on board. But then again, not make them promises until the deal is done. Because imagine if you were those people, they're thinking, okay, we're being acquired. Am I going to lose my job? Is my job going to be consolidated because they have that role already in the other company? Are my benefits going to change? Is my salary going to change? Will I have to move? All of these things. And from my company side, we don't want those people to leave because they're intellectual property and they're important. There's a reason we're acquiring the company, and some of it is about the people. So we want to, reassure them, and so that they feel comfortable enough to wait, even though they don't know all the information. And that goes back to, we were talking about not necessarily rushing to communicate, but making sure you're communicating the right thing.
Yeah.
So we did some of that. We said, okay, when can we start talking to them? What information can we give them? We can give them basic information about who we are, what our benefits are. And then eventually we got to the point where we set up meetings where we could go meet them in person before the deal was closed. Again, we couldn't tell them as much information as they wanted, but we could host an event, take them out to lunch, have them meet leaders, talk to them about the business, answer, get their questions, answer what we could, but have that person-to-person touch point so they feel a little bit better about the company that's acquiring them.
Yeah.
And then, like I told you, once the deal was done, we hosted what we call day one events. That's day one when they belong to us. And those were in person all over the world. So I flew from New Jersey for one event down to Mexico for another event. And we had several leaders there just welcoming people and letting them know how important they were to us and that we were so happy. So you have to think about that. Those are the key things. It's like understanding the timing of when the merger is going to close. What are the touch points that you can do? And that's conversations with legal, with human resources, with the business and communications. And like, what are those messages going to be? And then on the flip side, you also have to think about your customers, right? Because the customers are like, okay, what does this mean for me? I'm going to get, it's better products, cheaper products, different products. So we also had that kind of communication path to say, okay, what's going to be the marketing thing? What do we have to do? We had to do things like change brands, change brand names. They belong to the other company. Now they're belonging to us. Who owns the trademarks? There's a lot of complexity, I would say. But it can be fun. So it's about just understanding those stakeholders, the messaging, the channels, the timing.
It is like the world's most complicated GRE problem or Jenga tower. As you describe how, I'm not going to say complicated, how complex, because there are just a bunch of moving parts. This all is. I can also hear the joy in your voice that you really like doing this kind of work. So tell me what I'm hearing. Yeah.
No, for me, it's very fun. I mean, like I said, I'm an engineer by training and then have done a lot of different roles. And now I'm doing communications and sustainability. But what I really like is developing the messaging, telling a story, making that connection to the people, helping the business make the connection to people. And, I'm viewed as a strategic resource. SVPs, presidents, they like to talk to me because I can simplify it for them and they know I'm going to help them get it done.
I love it. In a moment, we're going to open it up to questions. So folks, if you haven't already put your question or upvoted questions in the Q&A tab, the third tab on the right, please do that now. But Susan, I just want to go back to stay with mergers and acquisitions for a second and ask you about two aspects. One around authentic messaging and one about communicating and showing up. So something that you and I talked about earlier is that you have communication in your title, but you won't always be the one delivering the message. Can you speak a little bit about that? How you get your planned message out in the world in a way that is not only authentic, but also sounds and feels authentic? How does that happen? How does that magic happen?
Okay, that magic happens in a couple of ways. So as a communicator, I can come up with a framework. I can come up with thoughts and say, okay, I feel like these are the topics, these are some bullet points around that we should focus on. But this goes back to one of those points on the slide that you showed. It's like you don't create the message in a vacuum. So I need buy-in. Any good communicator needs buy-in. You can come up with the best plan in the world, but if nobody agrees with it or they don't like it, they're not going to do it. So I bring the right people together, leaders from our business, and we kind of look at it. I'll say, okay, here's my proposal. This is what I think. If we're talking about how we're going to communicate to the employees or the customers, like here's my thoughts on the type of communication tactics we can use and some ideas for the messaging. What do you think? So number one, it's getting that buy-in. Number two, I can't be in all places. I'm not going to be in all places. They have to talk to the people, to their customers, to their teams. And so then they have to take these messages and put it in their own words, right? That's where you get the authenticity. Yeah. I mean, I think we've all read things or heard people talk and you're just like, that's just corporate blah, 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 blah. I'm not a blah, blah. I can write the blah, blah, but that's really not how I engage with people. And so I challenge my leaders and also will ask them, I said, you tell it back to me, right? I'm like, okay, how would you say this? Because I may write something and they're like, oh, okay, I wouldn't say that. I'm like, okay, then change it, but tell me what you would say. Like, as long as you get the gist, of the bullet point or the message, that's important because they have to transport the message. People have to believe them. And if it doesn't sound like them, no one's going to believe it.
That part. All right. The other thing that your day one activities really showed for me is that it's awesome having a great message, but when you combine the great message with a live body in front of people, when you show up with the message, like it does a world of difference in terms of building trust. Am I making that story up in my head, or am I right?
You are not making it up at all, because that's exactly what happened. And we tailored the events. There were certain things we did everywhere, but then we tailored the events to the location, right? So we're in New Jersey. We had a very nice dinner, a smaller group, had gifts for people. Then we went to Mexico. There was a mariachi band. We were, there was like a fun activities, and then with some people later we went out and did tequila. So you also have to tailor it, but you want them to see that you're a real person, right? Yes. That you're not just someone in the business, and that we care, and that we're people, and that we're normal people, even from a president level, a senior vice president level. To be able to see them in person does make a big difference. It makes people feel like that they're closer. They're like, okay, look. This guy, this woman, this person came down and met me in person. So they're not just this nebulous person on a video or on an email. I shook their hand. It's huge. It makes a huge difference.
All right, heard. Let's jump into some questions, and then I have a couple of closing ones for you. This first question is from Michaela. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What are some ways to make a client feel at ease when communicating a complex or escalated situation? Any tips or advice?
Okay, it's a good question, Michaela. So, how to make a client feel at ease when we have a complex topic? Excuse me. I think if you are prepared and you kind of lay it out, and even if you address the elephant in the room with them, to say, I know we're here today to talk about this topic XYZ. Mm-hmm. It's complicated, but it's not impossible. So let me tell you how we're going to break it down. Right? So some of it is just even how you set the stage. But what do they say about a problem or a big problem? You treat it like if you were going to eat an elephant, it's one bite at a time. That's the same. That's the same with any type of crisis. So if you can come in and make it simple, confident, let them see that you have it under control. Like, okay, we know that the situation is happening. I already have a plan. We have broken this thing down into steps, and we will address each step as we go. So a lot of it is also about just you and how you approach the situation. If you're calm, confident, and are starting the conversation with assurances, assurity, that you know how to handle it, that does go a long way.
Yeah, I really like that that's something I wouldn't necessarily have thought to think about. Like the energy I bring to the communication directly impacts the way that's received.
Exactly. I mean, if you're in there and you're like not confident or you're a little bit unsure, I mean, I have something in my office that's just like fake it till you make it. Even if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel confident, fake it until you make it. They don't need to know.
Can I offer a friendly amendment to that?
Sure.
Fake it till you make it is okay. I think a slightly better version might be fake it until you become it.
Oh, okay.
Because I like to think of, I'll speak to this room. Black women are amazingly adaptive and learners. And so you're faking it until you become it, until you learn it.
I like it. I like it.
Here's a different question from Lawan. Apologies if I'm getting your name incorrect. I understand communicating early and often is key in change, but I've also heard that communicating too early without all the answers can cause more concerns and anxiety. How do you determine the right time to communicate a transformational message? Transformational change.
Hey, that's a really excellent question. And I think that was one of the points on the slide earlier from Ramian. And this is going to seem like a cheat answer, but it is true. It depends on the situation.
Fair.
It really does depend. If I look at there's a natural disaster and a customer's not going to get product, right? The customer's paying attention to the news just as well as we are. So if you wait a week, that's too long to give them any type of information. If you're talking about a change management, like an organizational change, and when do you want to change? When do you want to tell the employees? You want to give them enough time where they have time to absorb the change, but not too much time where all of a sudden everybody wants to like leave and get a new job. So again, that's not like I understand that's precise answer. And we actually went through an organizational change in the past year and a half. So it was all about the timing. And sometimes you have other factors that will affect the timing. We were doing a global organizational change.
Yeah.
And so we had to think about different countries. There are some countries that have legal requirements for workers who work in manufacturing plants on when you can do things, and like some things have to be negotiated. So even though I will say we in North America wanted to go sooner to not leave people hanging because they knew an organizational change was going on, we had to align globally because of legal requirements. So it really does depend on the situation, but I think you should trust your gut. I think if people are throwing out a timeline, you have a feeling, if you're familiar with the situation, on when too long is long.
Yeah. I'm going to also make a guess based on what you said that if they're getting information from other places, that might force you to speed up your timeline. Like if the news is, for example, with the crisis, if the news is covering the same crisis, you may need to adjust your timeline so that you're giving them information to evaluate this other source, which may not be so friendly towards you.
That is also an excellent point. If it's something like that is external and in the news, and the news is going to be talking about it, you don't want them to set the narrative about you. So you may have to come up with something, even if it's not your preference, sooner to set the narrative and say, okay, we are on top of it. And it could be as little as that. We are on top of this. We do not want to speak. We do not want to give wrong information. So we are going to take the time to fully investigate a situation, and we will be able to give more details in X amount of time.
I'm going to have to admit the slightly petty piece of me loves that, because you kind of imply we're not rushing because we're going to get the facts right. You're also implying that those folks over there, not so much. Like they're rushing to get your attention, but aren't going to necessarily be correct.
And that will happen. But this is where you, as the communications professional, have to step in and like take ownership of the narrative. What do you want people to know?
All right. I'm going to ask one more question. Now, this is not necessarily an enterprise level conversation question, but I think it got upvoted enough that I think it's worth talking about it. How do you learn to communicate? And it has to do with how do you learn to communicate in an environment where we are told we are too much, too strong, too this, and too much of that, It's the Black woman narrative. What advice would you give someone who's being told you're too much, in terms of how they should or might communicate?
It's an excellent question. And I might challenge the person back and say, what does it mean that I'm too much? I do my job with excellence. I prepare. I talk to the right people. I document what's going on. I get feedback. I give people what they need, and I do it quickly and correctly. How is that too much? What would you like me not to do with that? Is a way that I might approach this. I'm also, look, I'm a proud Black woman, and I talk with my hands, and I'm loud, and I'm not in my office right now. I'm down south visiting family, but I have a sign in my office that says, "Be awesome." And that's my motto. And I'm like, I just work to be awesome.
I love it.
If people have a problem with that, that's not my problem. That's not my problem. And I'm more than happy to ask them specifically, what do you specifically mean by that? But I also like to follow it up with what I told you. It's like, I do my work with excellence.
I love everything about your response, because I feel like it's a very professional way to get someone all the way together. I agree with you about pushing back and challenging, and I love how you asked a question and then gave some statements. My colleague Amanda Ray here at the ELC, who moderated the second session in this track, she often says, when someone says something ridiculous like that, you respond back with, "What do you mean by that?" Make them explain their ridiculous position or ridiculous statement. Or what I learned from a friend of mine is when someone says you're too much, I say, "For who? You?" All right. With that, two last questions, because I need us to end on time because we have closing remarks. Wait, lost my questions. Here we go. If attendees remember nothing else from today's session, what's one thing you want them to remember? And number two, any current projects you're working on that you're excited about and want to share with folks listening?
Sure. Okay. One thing to take from this conversation is preparation and thinking about your audiences. If you can identify who your stakeholders are and who you were trying to deliver a message to, that's half the battle, is identifying that. Because a lot of people don't think about it and they forget something. In terms of something fun and exciting that I'm working on right now, some of you may or may not know. So I work at BASF, and I'm in the plastics business, our plastics business. So the topic of plastics is very timely and global and emotional. And right now, the United Nations is involved in developing a global plastics pollution treaty. They've had 3 sessions already, and the 4th session is coming up April 23rd through the 29th in Ottawa, Canada. And so I will be there for that. So I'm actively working with the colleagues who will be part of the negotiations, some of our executives, pulling together messaging. We're working with one of the industry associations to do a solutions fair. So there's a lot of activity around that to help educate the member countries who are going to be there, so that they really have a good understanding of plastics and what is and isn't possible. And that's kind of fun. I gotta say that's kind of fun.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to end us there, and I'm going to say a couple of things to close. First, for those of you watching, help me out by sharing some of your appreciation with Susan. Share something that you liked about this session that you'll take away. Share something that you're going to share with somebody who wasn't here. Just tell her that you like her. I'll make sure she gets those comments afterwards. Susan, I also want to say thank you so much for making time to share your wisdom with us today. I'm sure you're going to get a whole bunch of LinkedIn follows because you're doing some really amazing work at BASF and on BASF's behalf with the larger industry. You certainly changed my mind about plastics from our just very brief conversation a couple of weeks ago. And for all of you, I want to say that POW 2024 would not be possible without our amazingly generous corporate partners and sponsors, Charles Schwab and Novartis in particular. Please visit the Novartis booth. We're going to do closing remarks on the main stage. And then for those of you who have purchased a career acceleration workshop at 4:30, those workshops begin. Just go to the workshop tab. Thank you all for your time. Hopefully we have Susan and I have earned the privilege of your time and attention. But thank you, and keep doing the awesome things that you're doing. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon and day.
Thank you.
Bye, Susan.
Bye.